Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little trip, not to a beach, not to the mountains, but to a place and time that's, well, let's call it aromatic ally challenging. We are heading back to the great, smoggy, wonderfully filthy heart of the 19th century world, Industrial Revolution London. And you've just arrived, fresh off a rickety carriage, with big dreams and, for now, relatively clean lungs. Let's see how long that lasts. This isn't just about dates and inventions, this is about what it felt, sounded, and most importantly, smelled like to be alive back then. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop me a comment and let me know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where our little history community is scattered across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The carriage lurches to a final, rattling stop. The sounds hit you first, a chaotic symphony of iron-rimmed wheels grinding on cobblestones, the distant, rhythmic clang of a factory hammer, and 100 overlapping shouts from vendors, drivers, and children. But the sounds are nothing compared to the air. You step down from the carriage, and it hits you not as a smell, but as a physical presence. It's a thick, gray, damp blanket that you can almost chew. You take your first conscious breath of London air. It's a complex cocktail. The dominant note is coal smoke. It's a sharp, sulfurous bite that stings the back of your throat. A constant exhalation from the thousands upon thousands of domestic hearths and factory chimneys piercing the skyline. Mixed with that is the earthy, ammonia-rich tang of horse manure. It's easy to forget that this sprawling metropolis is powered by horsepower, quite literally. Historians estimate that at any given time in the mid-19th century, over 50,000 horses were working in London, each producing a significant amount of waste every single day. That waste doesn't just vanish, it becomes part of the very ground you walk on, the very air you breathe. And beneath those two powerful scents is an entire orchestra of others, the sour smell of the tanneries and breweries up Woodend, the faint, fishy odor from Billings Stage Market, the damp drought of old Woodend wet wool, and the undeniable, close-packed scent of tens of thousands of unwashed human beings. You came from the countryside, where the air was full of the smell of rain, soil, and livestock. This is different. This smells of industry, of immense, crowded, relentless life. Your eyes struggle to adjust. The sun is a pale, disinterested wafer somewhere above the haze. This isn't the clean, romantic fog of a quiet morning. This is a pea-souper, a uniquely London phenomena. It's a yellowish-brown concoction of natural river mist and man-made industrial smoke, so dense that you can barely see 20 feet ahead. It cloaks everything in a grimy, uniformed shroud, muting colors and blurring the edges of buildings until the city looks like a half-finished charcoal sketch. You clutch your small, worn suitcase, a letter of introduction tucked safely in your coat pocket. You're here for opportunity, for work, for a new life. The stories you heard back in your village were of a city paved with gold. As you look down, you see the paving stones are actually slick with a greasy, black mud, a primordial soup with dirt, horse droppings, discarded food, and whatever else has been tipped out of the windows above. Did the people who lived here even notice this, or was the constant smell and smog just the background noise of existence? The scent of progress and prosperity historians still debate the extent to which the average Londoner was inured to the pollution, or if it was a constant, low-level misery they simply had to endure. For many, the bad air wasn't just unpleasant, it was believed to be the source of disease itself, a theory known as the miasma theory, where foul smells were thought to carry sickness like cholera and typhoid. So that thick air you're breathing isn't just dirty in the minds of the people around you, It's potentially deadly. Through the gloom, you spot a small boy, no older than 10, holding a flaming torch made of rope soaked in pitch. He darts through the crowd, offering his services. H.E. Tesselink Boy, a freelance guide for hire. His torch a rare beacon in this manufactured twilight. For a penny, he'll guide you through the maze of streets. A profession that only exists because the city has become so effective at blocking out its own sunlight. This is one of the many strange new jobs this environment has created. You decline with a shake of your head, needing to save every coin. You pull your collar up over your nose, a futile attempt to filter the air through a thin layer of wool. The letter in your pocket, with the address of a distant cousin, feels heavier now. The grand, golden city of your imagination has been replaced by this overwhelming, all-consuming reality. First things first, find the address, find a roof, find somewhere, anywhere, to escape this suffocating welcome. You start walking, clutching your bag, a map that's more of an optimistic suggestion than an accurate guide folded in your hand. And as you walk, you begin to dissect the air. It's a survival skill you didn't know you needed, but your body is learning it fast. You're starting to understand the air isn't a single, uniform entity. It's a shifting, layered thing with currents and pockets of distinct flavors. It's London's own unique and entirely unwanted form of aromatherapy. With every few streets you cross, the olfactory profile changes. As you move away from the main coaching inn, the potent smell of horse manure subsides slightly, replaced by something sharper. It's the acrid bite of the smoke from a nearby gasworks, a smell that seems to coat the back of your tongue with a metallic film. Then, a gust of wind brings a new scent, the damp, almost sweet smell of decay from a pile of refuse rotting in a gutter. You see a woman in a grimy apron toss a bucket of vegetable peelings and fish bones directly onto the street, adding another layer to the public potpourri. No one bats an eye. This is just how things are done. You learn to read the wind. When it blows from the east, it carries the stench of the leather tanneries in Bermondsey. It's a smell so powerfully nauseating, a mix of animal decay, lime, and dog dung used in the tanning process that it can make your eyes water from half a mile away. You see seasoned Londoners wrinkle their noses and mutter, "Good, Bermondsey's airing its laundry today." When the wind shifts to the south, it might bring the greasy, rancid smell of the soap-boiling factories in Lambeth, or the cloying, yeasty aroma of the massive breweries. You're beginning to build a scent map of the city in your mind, a new and unsettling form of navigation. You notice something else, too. The wealthy, you observe, carry themselves differently through this assault. A well-dressed woman alighting from a private carriage presses a small, lace-trimmed handkerchief to her nose. You catch a faint whiff of lavender as she passes, a tiny, fleeting island of pleasantness in a sea of stench. This is a common sight. Those who could afford it carried handkerchiefs doused in perfume, cologne, or even vinegar, believing it could create a protective barrier against the foul in their minds. Disease-ridden air. It was a personal, portable air filter, a small act of defiance against the environment. A less known, and more desperate, measure practiced by some was to carry a pomander, a small ball of aromatic substances like ambergris, musk, and spices, held in a perforated case. It was a medieval practice that had found new life in the industrial smog. This obsession with smells is rooted in that pervasive miasma theory. Doctors and reformers alike were convinced that diseases like cholera were spread by bad air rising from filth and decay. The logic was simple and terrifying. If it smells bad, it can kill you. Therefore, to fight disease, you had to fight the smell. This is one of those fascinating moments in history where a completely wrong theory led to some surprisingly right actions. Historians still debate the true impact of the miasma theory. Some argue that by focusing on eliminating odors, it distracted from the real culprit, contaminated water, for decades. Others contend that, paradoxically, The war on smells inadvertently improved public health. In their quest to deodorize the city, reformers advocated for clearing away rubbish, draining stagnant pools, and improving ventilation, all things that, by sheer coincidence, also reduced the breeding grounds for the bacteria they didn't yet know existed. They were cleaning up the right things, but for all the wrong reasons. As you continue your journey, you find yourself breathing more shallowly, trying to take in as little of the air as possible. You pass a row of butcher shops, the smell of sawdust and blood mingling with the coal smoke. A few doors down, a cook shop selling meat pies sends a puff of savory steam into the street, a smell that should be appetizing but is somehow corrupted by the surrounding air, becoming just another ingredient in the city asphalt stew. The smog is getting thicker as the afternoon wears on. The pale sun now completely vanquished. The world has shrunk to a small circle around you. The dampness in the air isn't clean rain, it's a greasy, sooty moisture that settles on your skin and clothes, leaving you feeling perpetually sticky. You can feel the grit of it on your teeth. You realize with a jolt that you are, in a very real sense, breathing in the city. The coal that powered its factories, the waste from its inhabitants, the effluence from its industries, it was all becoming a part of you with every breath. This wasn't just an external experience, it was an invasion. Your destination is still a dozen blocks away, and the simple act of getting there now feels like a monumental trek through a hostile and alien atmosphere. Your boots, which were merely dusty an hour ago, are now caked in a thick, dark, viscous mud. Walking in London, you quickly realize, is not a simple A-to-B activity. It's a tactical navigation of a constantly shifting obstacle course, a minefield where the mines are organic. The streets are a mess. Most are paved with cobblestones, but the stones are uneven, with wide gaps in between that are perfect for twisting an ankle or swallowing a boot heel. More importantly, these gaps are repositories for filth. You look down and see that the street is not merely wet, it's coated in a sheen of black, greasy slime. This is the infamous London grease, a unique substance born of the city's specific conditions. It's a foul emulsion of soot, horse dung, and moisture, beaten into a paste by the constant traffic of iron-shod hooves and cartwheels. It's slippery, it stinks, and it gets on everything. You see a gentleman in fine clothes slip and go down with a quiet curse, his beige trousers instantly ruined. You make a mental note, walk slowly, and don't lift your feet too high. But the grease is just the base layer. Strewn across it are more immediate hazards. You have to dodge discarded oyster shells. Oysters were cheap, popular street food for the poor, which are as sharp as broken glass when stepped on. You sidestep a pile of rotting cabbage leaves, a cloud of flies rising in protest. A dog, skinny and mangy, sniffs at a discarded bone before being chased off by a group of barefoot children. The children themselves are another hazard to navigation, darting in and out of the crowds, their faces and clothes the same color as the street. The worst surprises are the ones that come from above, without any systematic refuse collection. Many households simply followed the path of least resistance. They tossed their garbage out the window. An upstairs window creaks open, and a shower of ash and cinders from a cleaned-out fireplace rains down on the spot you just vacated. A moment later, a basin of dirty water follows. You learn to walk a little way out from the buildings, even if it puts you closer to the chaotic traffic in the center of the road. This practice of tossing out had a historical precedent. In medieval cities, it was common to shout "Gardez-vous," a corruption of the French guard is "Lo, watch out for the water," before emptying a chamber pot into the street. While the term itself was more associated with Edinburgh, the principle was alive and well in London's poorer districts. There was no organized, city-wide system for rubbish disposal. What little collection existed was handled by private contractors or parish authorities, and it was sporadic and expensive. For most people, the street was the only dustbin they had. A strange and uniquely urban profession arose from this chaos, the two shearers. These were the sewer hunters of London. Men who waded through the city sewers and along the banks of the Thames at low tide, searching for anything of value that might have been washed away: coins, metal scraps, lost jewelry. It was a dangerous and foul job, but a surprisingly lucrative one for the lucky. You see one of these men emerging from a grate, covered head to toe in black slime, carrying a long staff and a sack. He gives you a grim, toothless nod, a fellow traveler in the city's underworld. The sheer volume of horse manure is something you still can't get your head around. It isn't just a smell, it's a physical feature of the landscape. In some places, it's piled so high against the curbs that it forms little brown hills. Crossing the street is a perilous act. You don't just look for traffic, you look for a path. This is where the crossing sweepers come in. You see a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, with a worn-down broom. He stands at a busy intersection, and when a well-dressed couple approaches, he furiously sweeps a narrow path through the mud and manure, clearing a way for them to cross without soiling their shoes. In return, he gets a half money. It's a tiny, entrepreneurial ecosystem built entirely on filth. Historians point to crossing sweepers as a classic example of the informal economy that thrived in the gaps left by official services. They were a visible, everyday reminder of the city's failure to keep itself clean. Is there any debate about this? Not really. The state of the streets was a universal complaint. Foreign visitors, wealthy Londoners, and poor workers all wrote about the filth. The debate among historians isn't if the streets were dirty, but rather how the different social classes experienced that dirt. For the rich, it was an inconvenience to be navigated with carriages and crossing sweepers. For the poor, it was the inescapable, all-encompassing environment of their daily lives. The mud on the street was the same mud that got tracked into their one-room homes, the same filth their children played in. You finally reach a slightly wider, more respectable thoroughfare, the Strand. Perhaps here, things are a little better. The street is wider, the shops are grander, and there are actual pavements. But even here, the grime is relentless. The grand stone facade of a bank is stained dark gray up to the first floor, a permanent watermark of pollution. A stray dog laps at a puddle of murky water in a gutter. You think back to the green fields of your home, to the simple, clean-feeling mud of a country lane after a rain shower. That seems a world away now. This isn't the mud of the earth. This is the mud of humanity, and you have miles more of it to walk. Your route takes you towards the river. You imagine it might be a relief, a place where the air is fresher, where the city as oppressive claustrophobia might lift for a moment. You can hear the mournful horns of steam tugs and the calls of the boatmen. And then, you smell it. It's a scent that overpowers even the coal smoke and the horse manure. It is the mighty, majestic, and utterly foul stench of the River Thames. You stand on the embankment, looking out at the water, and your first thought is that it doesn't look like water at all. It's a sluggish, opaque, brown-gray liquid, thick with stuff. You can see things floating in it, bits of wood, rotting vegetables, the bloated carcass of a dog, and everywhere, a greasy, iridescent film that shimmers with all the colors of a chemical rainbow. The river doesn't flow so much as it uses a great, open sewer carrying the city sent out to sea, or, more accurately, carrying them the little way downstream on the ebb tide, only to bring them right back upstream on the flood tide. This wasn't just nature. This was a man-made catastrophe. For centuries, the Thames had been London's main artery, a source of drinking water, a highway for transport, a place for fishing, and a convenient train. But the sheer scale of the Industrial Revolution had tipped it over the edge. All of the city as waste, both human and industrial, ended up here. The dye works poured in their chemical runoff. The slaughterhouses bled their refuse into it, and most significantly, the new flush toilets, which were becoming popular among the middle classes, channeled raw sewage directly into the old sewers, which were never designed for it. These sewers were originally built just to handle rainwater, and their outfalls emptied straight into the Thames. You watch as a wide, dark stream of liquid gushes from a large pipe in the embankment wall near you. It's not a trickle, it's a torrent of pure, untreated sewage. And this is just one of hundreds of such outlets. You are witnessing the fundamental paradox of Victorian progress. The flush toilet, a symbol of modern, indoor hygiene for the individual, was creating a large-scale environmental disaster for the public. Each flush was a small, private victory for cleanliness that contributed to the collective poisoning of the river. One of the more bizarre and little-known consequences of this pollution was the effect on the river's fish. While most species died out, the eels thrived. They were incredibly hardy and could survive in the foul, de-exigmenting water. The eel, thai, and mash ups were a staple of working-class London, and the eels they served were pulled directly from this toxic soup. It was a cheap source of protein, but it was protein that had been fattened on the city's own filth. Whether people knew or cared about this is a point of speculation, but it's a stark illustration of the broken ecological loop they were living in. Despite the obvious horror, this river was still a source of life. You see the river's watermen navigating their small boats, or wherries, through the floating debris, their faces weathered and resigned. More shockingly, you see pipes leading from the river directly to waterworks. Yes, despite everything you are seeing and smelling, many of London's private water companies were still drawing their drinking water directly from the Thames. They had intake pipes situated right in the middle of this mess. Their idea of purification was often little more than letting the water sit for a while in a reservoir, so the most visible solids could settle at the bottom. The invisible killers, the bacterial Vibrio cholerae, were pumped directly into the city's homes. Historians still argue about the degree of public awareness versus corporate negligence in this water crisis. Were the water companies criminally negligent, knowingly selling poisoned water for profit, or were they, like everyone else, largely ignorant of the germ theory of disease and simply following the accepted practices of the day? The truth is likely a murky mix of both. There were prominent critics, like the scientist Arthur Hassel, who published microscopic drawings of the monsters living in London's drinking water, trying to shock the public into action. Yet, for years, little changed. The system was too big, the investment too great, and the scientific proof not yet universally accepted. You lean against a stone wall, feeling a wave of nausea. It's not just the smell, it's the realization of what this river represents. It's the city as circulatory system, and its septic. The very water that people were drinking was a diluted broth of their own waste and the waste of their neighbors. The great river that had built London, that had been celebrated in poetry and art, had been turned into a public toilet and a potential mass grave. The sun begins to set, not that you can see it through the smog. The dim light casts a sickly, jaundiced glow on the surface of the foul water. You turn away from the river, the smell clinging to your clothes and hair. You came to London looking for a new life, but you're beginning to wonder if you'll be lucky just to survive it. Your cousin's address feels a world away, and you hope, you desperately hope, that they don't live anywhere near the river. After what feels like an eternity of navigating foul streets and fouler air, you finally find the address. It's not a house, but a tenement building. A tall, narrow structure of blackened brick, crammed shoulder to shoulder with identical buildings. The front door, its paint long since peeled away, is propped open. You step inside, and the assault on your senses shifts from the open-air chaos of the street to a more concentrated, domestic version. The air inside is thick, stagnant, and heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale cooking, damp clothes, then something else, a faint, cloying sweetness of sickness. You climb a dark, rickety staircase. There are no windows in the stairwell, and you guide yourself by running a hand along the grimy, sticky wall. Shouts, arguments, and the crying of a baby spill from behind the closed doors you pass. This is a world stacked on top of itself, a vertical neighborhood of strangers. Your cousin's flat, a generous term for it, is on the 4th floor. You knock, and the door is opened by a woman you barely recognize as the cheerful cousin from your memories. She's pale, thin, and her smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. She welcomes you into the family's home, a single room. This is it. This is the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom, then the nursery for your cousin, her husband, and their 3 small children. The room is perhaps 10 feet by 12. A small, smoky fire smolders in a tiny grate, the room's only source of heat. A rough wooden table and 2 stools take up one corner. In another, a pile of straw mattresses serves as the communal bed. A rope is strung across the room, hung with damp, graying laundry that will likely never fully dry in this atmosphere and contributes to the room's pervasive dampness. You are offered a space on the floor, personal space. You quickly grasp is the ultimate luxury, a concept that simply doesn't exist here. Privacy is a flimsy curtain hung around the parents' corner of the mattresses. The idea of quiet solitude is a fantasy. You will sleep, eat, and live within earshot and arm's reach of 5 other people. Your cousin apologizes for the mess, but you can see she works hard to keep it tidy. The floor is swept. The few pots are cleaned, but there's no fighting the fundamental nature of the place. The wallpaper is peeling from the damp, revealing patches of dark mold underneath. The single small window is jammed shut, a common problem in these cheaply built tenements. Even if it did open, it would only let in more of the sooty, foul air from outside. Ventilation is a foreign concept. This overcrowding was the norm for millions. The population of London had exploded, but housing hadn't kept pace. Landlords, eager to maximize profits, subdivided once grand houses into single-room occupancies or threw up cheap, shoddy tenement buildings like this one. It wasn't uncommon for a single room to house 2 or even 3 families, taking turns to sleep. One of the strangest and saddest arrangements born of this desperation was the hotbed system. The bed would be rented out in shifts. When one worker, say, a baker who worked at night, got out of bed in the morning, another worker, a factory hand on a day shift, would climb right in. The bed was literally never cold. The lack of space had profound effects on hygiene. How do you stay clean when you have to haul every drop of water up for flights of stairs from a shared pump in the courtyard below? How do you wash clothes or bodies when there's nowhere to dry anything and no privacy in which to do it? Cleanliness becomes a heroic effort, not a daily routine. Historians often debate the social impact of this overcrowding. Some contemporary reformers, like the famous social investigator Charles Booth, linked it directly to a breakdown in morality, arguing that the lack of privacy eroded the family structure and encouraged vice. They saw the tenement room as the root of society's ills. Others argue that this is a classic case of the middle and upper classes projecting their own anxieties onto the poor. They point to the incredible resilience and strong community bonds that oft unformed in these buildings. Neighbors helped each other with childcare, shared food, and supported each other through sickness and unemployment. The shared misery, in many cases, fostered a powerful sense of solidarity. The truth, as always, is likely somewhere in between. The tenement was simultaneously a site of immense suffering and a cradle of community. As night falls, the family gathers. The father returns from his job at a drayman's yard, his face etched with exhaustion and coated in a fine layer of grime. The children, who have been playing in the alleyway, are similarly dirty. There's no evening bath. There's barely enough water to wash their hands and faces in a small basin of murky water before the evening meal of bread and a thin, watery broth. Later, as you lie on your makeshift bed on the floor, you try not to breathe too deeply. The air is stale and close. You can hear the coughing of the father, a persistent, rattling factory cough from years of inhaling dust and fumes. You can hear the whimpering of the youngest child. You can hear the snores, the rustling, and the faint, unsettling scratching sound from within the walls that suggests you're sharing the room with more than just the family. This is your new home. The cacophony of the London streets has been replaced by the intimate, suffocating closeness of this single, crowded room. Sleep, you suspect, will not come easily. The first light of morning is a weak, gray smear in the single grimy window. You're awoken not by the sun, but by the sounds of the city reawakening, the clatter of carts, the distant factory whistle, and the coughing from the next room in the room you're in. Your cousin is already up, moving quietly in the dimmets, she's at the fireplace, coaxing the embers back to life. The first order of business, you learn, is water. She hands you a wooden bucket. Your job, as the newest member of the household, is to join the morning queue for water. You stumble down the 4 flights of dark stairs and out into a small, enclosed courtyard behind the tenement. Here stands the sole water source for the entire building, which probably houses over 100 people. A single, iron-hand pump. A line has already formed. Women and children stand patiently, buckets in hand, exchanging tired greetings. The pump is old and stiff. It takes a good deal of effort to produce a gushing, rust-colored stream of water. This is a communal moment, a daily ritual that defines the start of the day for the entire building. It's a place for gossip, for sharing news, for complaining about the landlord or a sick child. When it's your turn, you work the handle, and the cold, shockingly heavy water fills your bucket. You haul it, sloshing and straining, back up the 4 flights of stairs. By the time you get to the top, your arms are aching, and you've spilled a good portion of it on the stairs, adding to the general dampness. And this is just the first bucket. A family of 6 would need many such trips for cooking, cleaning, and a bare minimum of washing. Back in the room, your cousin carefully portions out this precious liquid. A small amount goes into a kettle for tea. The rest is poured into a large ceramic basin. This basin of water, you realize, is the day's entire supply for personal hygiene. This is the sink, the bath, and the laundry tub, all in one. Your cousin demonstrates the morning wash. She dips a cloth into the basin, wrings it out, and quickly scrubs her face and hands. She does the same for the children, who squirm and complain at the touch of the cold, damp rag. The water is already turning a murky gray. When it's your turn, you dip your hands in, trying to ignore the film on the surface. You splash your face. The water is icy cold and has a faint metallic taste. It feels less like getting clean and more like a symbolic gesture, a ritual to mark the separation between the state of sleeping and the state of being awake. There is no soap. Soap is a luxury, something to be used sparingly, perhaps once a week for the laundry. For daily use, it's an extravagance most can't afford. So how did people feel clean for many? Cleanliness was a relative concept. It wasn't about being sterile or germ-free, a concept that didn't exist for most people yet. It was about being presentable. It meant scrubbing the visible parts, face, neck, and hands, while the rest of the body remained unwashed for days or even weeks at a time, hidden beneath layers of clothing. A strange but common item for the middle-class woman was the dress shield, a small pad of absorbent fabric worn in the armpits to protect her dress from sweat. It was easier to wash the shield than the entire garment. One of the most peculiar cold case facts from this era is the almost complete disappearance of the full-body bath from common practice. In the medieval and Tudor periods, public bathhouses, stews were common, but by the 19th century, they had all but vanished, partly due to associations with prostitution and partly because of fears that water opened the pores to disease, another consequence of the miasma theory. The bath was seen by many as an unhealthy, even dangerous, activity. Historians are still debating the exact combination of social, economic, and medical reasons that lead to this centuries-long decline in bathing, but the result was a society that, for the most part, simply did not bathe regularly. This morning ritual in your cousin's room is the reality of hygiene for the vast majority of London's population. It's a constant struggle against the grime, fought with a rag and a single basin of cold water. There is no privacy for this act. You wash in the middle of the room, surrounded by the morning's activities. After everyone has performed their ablutions, the water in the basin is nearly black, but it's not thrown away. Nothing this precious is wasted. Your cousin will use this same water to scrub the floor or to dampen the tea leaves before they are scattered on the floor to help trap the dust when sweeping. Every drop has a purpose. You look at your own face in a small, cracked piece of mirror. You've removed the surface layer of sleep and soot, but you don't feel clean. You feel cold and damp. The air is still thick with smoke. The water is hard and rusty, and the grime feels like it's not just on your skin, but in it. This morning ritual wasn't about purification. It was about preparing yourself to face another day of being slowly, but surely, covered in the dirt of the city all over again. You sit at the rough wooden table for the morning meal, a slice of stale bread and a cup of weak, sugary tea. The sweetness is a small luxury, but it comes with a hidden cost that you can feel every time you chew. A dull ache throbs in one of your molars, a constant, low-level reminder of decay. Dental hygiene, your e-discovering, is a landscape of pain, strange remedies, and sheer resignation. You watch your cousin give a piece of bread dipped in sugary tea to her youngest child, a common way to soothe a fussy baby. Sugar consumption had exploded in the 19th century. It was no longer a rare luxury for the rich but a cheap source of calories for the poor. It was mixed into tea, sprinkled on bread, and was the key ingredient in the cheap sweets and jams that were becoming widely available. This new abundance of sugar, combined with a complete lack of dental care, created a perfect storm of oral disaster. Widespread tooth decay, or caries as dentists called it, was rampant across all social classes. So what did people do about it for most? Nothing. A tooth arch was something to be endured, until it either went away or the tooth rotted out completely. For those who sought treatment, the options were terrifying. The local barber or blacksmith often doubled as the town tooth puller. There was no anesthetic, just a swig of gin or whiskey for the patient and sometimes the puller, a pair of crude iron pliers, and a lot of brute force. The risk of a broken jaw, infection, or having the wrong tooth pulled was incredibly high. But what about cleaning your teeth? The concept of brushing existed, but it was far from universal. Toothbrushes were available, often made with bone handles and bristles of horse or boar hair, but they were a middle-class affectation. For the poor, a common method was to simply rub the teeth with a finger and a bit of soot from the fireplace. Soot was mildly abrasive and was believed to whiten the teeth. Salt was another popular tooth cleaner. This is where you get into the world of truly bizarre tooth powders. Looking at the advertisements from the period is a journey into a strange and unregulated pharmacy. People would buy or make their own powders from a wild variety of ingredients. Some were harmless, like chalk, charcoal, or powdered cuttlefish bone. Others were actively destructive. A common ingredient was brick dust, which would scrub the teeth clean but also strip them of their enamel. Some powders even contained sulfuric or hydrochloric acid for whitening, which would dissolve the teeth over time. One particularly odd, and now stomach-churning, ingredient found in some expensive toothpastes was urine. For centuries, it was believed that the ammonia in aged urine had whitening and antiseptic properties. While this was becoming less common by the mid-19th century, the folk memory of it persisted. It's a strange thought that in the quest for a white smile, people were willing to put almost anything in their mouths. The debate among historians here isn't about whether dental health was bad, it was objectively atrocious. The debate is more about the social meaning of teeth. A full set of healthy teeth was becoming a powerful class indicator. If you had straight, white teeth, it suggested you had the wealth and knowledge to care for them. This led to the rise of cosmetic dentistry for the rich. False teeth, or dentures, were a booming business. The most sought-after dentures were not made of wood or ivory, but of real human teeth. Waterloo teeth were aimlessly harvested from the mouths of dead soldiers on the battlefield of Waterloo and set into hippopotamus ivory bases. A grislier source was grave robbing, or simply buying teeth from the desperately poor, who would sell a healthy incisor or canine for a few shillings. The thought of a wealthy lady smiling with a dead soldier's teeth in her mouth is a uniquely unsettling image of the time. You gently probe your aching tooth with your tongue. You have no money for a dentist, and the thought of the blacksmith's pliers makes you shudder. You'll do what everyone else does, you'll ignore it. You'll learn to chew on the other side of your mouth. You'll live with the low-grade, persistent pain. It's just another discomfort to add to the list. Another part of the daily sensory experience of life in this city. Your cousin notices you wincing. She tells you to try rinsing with salt water, or to hold a clove against the gum. These are the folk remedies, the small acts of self-care available to people like you. They don't solve the problem, but they offer a moment of relief, a feeling of doing something. As you finish your sweet tea, the sugary liquid washes over your bad tooth, and it sends a sharp, angry pang through your jaw. It's a small, personal moment of misery, but it connects you to millions of others in this city, all nursing their own aching, rotting teeth, all paying the price for a little bit of sweetness in a hard life. The meager breakfast is over, and now the real work begins. Your cousin gestures to a large, sad-looking pile of laundry in the corner of the room. Monday, you learn, is traditionally wash day, and in an age before washing machines, running water, or effective detergents, this is not a task. It is an epic, multi-day battle against filth, a campaign waged with steam, sweat, and sheer brute force. First, the water. You and your cousin makes several more trips down the 4 flights of stairs, hauling bucket after bucket of cold water from the courtyard pump. It's back-breaking work. Each bucket weighs around 40 pounds, and you'll need at least 8 or 10 of them. This water is poured into a large iron pot or copper that sits over the small fireplace. Getting the fire hot enough to boil this much water will take ages and consume a precious amount of coal. While the water heats, the sorting begins. There are no delicate, colored, and white loads. There is simply the foul linen, the truly dirty stuff like shirts, undergarments, and children's clothes and the less soiled items. Your cousin shows you how to pre-treat the worst stains. There are no fancy stain removers. Stubborn grime is scrubbed with coarse brushes and a mixture of lye, a caustic substance derived from wood ash that's incredibly harsh on both the fabric and the skin. For stubborn yellowing on collars and cuffs, a surprising and rather unpleasant household chemical was often used: stale urine. The ammonia in the urine acted as a bleaching agent. Families would keep a pot to collect it specifically for laundry and cleaning purposes. This is one of those little domestic details that is often left out of the history books, but it was a common reality in a world where powerful cleaning agents weren't commercially available. Once the water is boiling, the real work starts. The clothes are plunged into the scalding pot. They are not gently agitated. They are beaten. Your cousin hands you a washing dolly, a long wooden pole with a set of legs or a plunger at the end. You take turns plunging it up and down into the copper, pounding the dirt out of the fabric. The room fills with thick, acrid steam that smells of wet wool, lye, and boiling grime. It clings to the walls, the ceiling, and to you. Your eyes sting, and it becomes hard to breathe. The single window, jammed shut, is now completely opaque with condensation. After what feels like an hour of this punishment, the clothes are lifted out of the copper with a heavy wooden stick, steaming, undangerously hot. They are then transferred to a tub of cold rinse water, more water that had to be hauled up the stairs. This shocks the fibers and rinses out the soap and loosened dirt. Then, the wringing. Each item must be twisted by hand to squeeze out as much water as possible. Your knuckles are raw, and your wrists ache. You and your cousin work together on the larger items like sheets, one of you at each end, twisting in opposite directions until your muscles scream. Historians often refer to wash day as the domestic apocalypse. It completely upended the household. It was so strenuous that it was often the single most calorie-consuming task a woman did all week. The debate isn't about the difficulty of the task, but its social and economic implications. For many working-class women, taking in laundry was one of the few ways they could earn money from home, while still looking after their own children. These washerwomen, or laundresses, would perform this grueling labor, not just for their own families, but for middle-class households as well, turning their one-room homes into perpetual steam baths. Their hands were permanently rust-chapped, and they suffered high rates of respiratory illness from the constant exposure to steam and live fumes. Finally, the drying. This is perhaps the greatest challenge of all. In the country, you could hang laundry outside in the fresh air and sunshine. Here, in the heart of London, there is no outside. The courtyard is too small and filthy. Hanging it near the window would just get it covered in a fresh layer of soot. So you do what everyone else does, you hang it inside. The rope that's already strung across the room is filled, and then another is added. The room becomes a damp, dripping forest of wet clothes. They will take days to dry in the humid, stagnant air, filling the small space with a permanent smell of dampness and contributing to the mold you see growing on the walls. You stand back, exhausted, looking at the fruit of your morning's labor. The clothes are not brilliant white. They are a sort of weary, permanent gray. They are cleaner, yes, but the standards are completely different. Clean simply means the worst of the visible dirt and smell has been boiled and beaten out of them. You look at your hands. They are red. Ugh. Then your skin feels tight from the lye. You've been working for hours, and all you've managed to do is wash one pile of clothes. The thought that this process has to be repeated, week after week, is utterly demoralizing. It's a Sisyphean task, a constant, losing battle to bring a small semblance of cleanliness into a world determined to be filthy. At some point during the day, a pressing, universal human need arises. You turn to your cousin and ask, as politely as you can, where the toilet is. She gives you a tired, knowing look and points to a bucket in the corner, partially hidden by a grimy curtain. This, you are informed, is the privy bucket. This single bucket serves the entire family of 6, plus you. It is used by everyone, day and night, and is emptied only when it absolutely has to be. You discreetly retreat behind the curtain. The smell is potent. It is the raw, undisguised smell of human waste, confined in a small, unventilated room that also happens to be where the family cooks, eats, and sleeps. This is the reality of sanitation for hundreds of thousands of Londoners. The great invention of the indoor flush toilet, which was slowly spreading through middle-class homes, had not reached these tenements. In fact, its existence elsewhere made life here even worse, as it overloaded the very sewers that might have once provided some relief. So what were your options for those living in this room? The bucket was it. But looking out the window into the courtyard, you see another solution, the communal privy. It's a small, wooden shack built against the far wall. Your cousin explains that it's shared by all the residents of the building, over 100 people. The queue in the morning is as long as the one for the water pump. It's rarely cleaned. The door is broken, and it's essentially just a deep hole in the ground, known as a cesspit. Cesspites were the dominant waste disposal technology for centuries. They are, in essence, underground tanks, sometimes lined with brick, sometimes not, that collect human waste. The theory was that the liquid would gradually seep away into the surrounding soil, and the solid waste would accumulate. In a sparsely populated rural area, this system could work, more or less. In a densely packed city like London, it was a ticking time bomb. The cesspites were often poorly constructed and leaked, contaminating the ground and, crucially, the well water that people drank. The courtyard pump you used this morning is likely just a few yards away from the building's main cesspit. The water you drink is almost certainly contaminated with the waste of your neighbors. This direct link between the cesspit and the well was the primary engine of cholera transmission, a fact that would take a brilliant doctor and a tragic epidemic to finally prove. What happened when a cesspit was full? This is where another of London's strange and foul professions came in: the night soilmen, or gong farmers in an earlier era. Because the job was so unpleasant, they were only allowed to work at night. They would come with a horse and cart, open up the cesspit, and ladle the raw sewage, the night's oil, into barrels. It was disgusting, back-breaking, and incredibly smelly work, but it was vital. The collected waste was then carted out of the city and sold to farmers as fertilizer. It was a smelly, but surprisingly effective, recycling system. A weird, little-known fact about this job is that the men who did it were often surprisingly well off, because the work was so undesirable. They could command high wages. They also had opportunities for finding treasure in the muck. People accidentally dropped all sorts of things into the privy, from coins to jewelry. However, the job was also incredibly dangerous. The fumes from the cesspit, a mixture of ammonia, methane, and hydrogen sulfide, could be lethal. Men were known to suffocate and die after being overcome by the toxic gases. The great debate among historians of sanitation is about the transition from the cesspit to the water closet. On the surface, the flushed toilet seems like an obvious, unmitigated good, but some scholars, known as revisionists, argue that the initial, piecemeal adoption of the water closet in the early 19th century actually made London's public health crisis worse. Why? Because each new toilet flushed waste into old, brick-lined sewers that were designed only for rainwater. These sewers weren't watertight. They leaked this concentrated sewage into the ground, creating a far more widespread and immediate contamination of the water table than the old cesspits had. Furthermore, all these sewers emptied directly into the Thames, turning the river into the open sewer you saw yesterday. They argue that London essentially traded a contained, manageable problem, the cesspit, for a systemic, citywide disaster of poisoned river. It was a classic case of a new technology being implemented without any thought for the supporting infrastructure. Back in the room, you contemplate the bucket. This is your only choice. The alternative is the terrifying communal privy in the yard. This single, mundane object in the corner represents the absolute failure of the city to provide its citizens with the most basic of dignities. It is a symbol of the immense gap between the London of grand monuments and imperial power and the London of daily, squalid, human reality. This simple, private, clean act of using a toilet is a privilege you had never even considered before. Now, its absence defines your entire world. You're jolted from a shallow, restless sleep by a noise from the street below. It's not the usual clatter of daytime traffic. This is a sound of the deep night, the low rumble of a cart, the clink of shovels, and gruff, hushed voices. You creep to the grimy window and peer down into the moonlit canyon of the street. There, under the flickering gaslight, you see them, the night soilmen. They are a team of 3, working with a grim efficiency. A horse-drawn cart, little more than a large wooden tub on wheels, stands waiting. 2 of the men are using long-handled shovels and buckets to empty the contents of a building's cesspit, which has been opened up from the street level. The 3rd man stands guard, his job presumably to warn off any late-night pedestrians and to keep an eye out for the authorities, as their work was strictly regulated to specific hours, typically after midnight and before 5 a.m. The smell, even for stories up, is overwhelming. It's a thick, gagging stench that makes the general foulness of London's daytime air seem like a pleasant floral scent in comparison. You see your cousin stir on her mattress. She glances at the window, understands the noise, and simply rolls over, pulling her thin blanket over her head. This is a familiar disturbance, a part of the nocturnal soundscape of the city. This was a private enterprise. The homeowner or landlord was responsible for hiring a team of night soil men to empty their cesspit, and it was not cheap. This cost was one of the main reasons cesspites were often left until they were overflowing, creating horrific conditions in the basements and courtyards of tenement buildings. The landlord of your cousin's building was probably too cheap to pay for regular cleanings, which is why the communal privy in the back is in such a dire state, and why families resort to the indoor bucket system. The work is methodical. The men ladle the viscous, dark sludge into large buckets, which are then passed up and hoisted into the cart. It's a slow, arduous process. You can see the strain in their movements, the practiced rhythm of the lift and pour. These men were known as tishirs or gong farmers in older parlance, but by this period, night soil men was the common term. They occupied a strange place in the social hierarchy. On the one hand, their job was the most reviled and disgusting imaginable. They were social outcasts, shunned for their smell. People would cross the street to avoid them. On the other hand, as you learn it, they were often financially better off than the factory workers or laborers who looked down on them. A particularly curious and rather disgusting tidbit about their trade was the concept of pure. This was the slang term for pure dog dung. The night soil men would often collect it as a side business. Pure was highly valued by the tanneries, especially those in Bermondsey, where it was mixed with water to create a foul-smelling paste. This paste, an alkaline solution rich in enzymes, was used to soften leather and remove any remaining hair or flesh after the initial scraping. So, the same men who cleaned the city's human waste at night might spend their days collecting canine waste. Another link in the bizarre, closed-loop economy of filth. Historians who study labor and social structures find the night soil men fascinating. They represent a paradox of profession that was simultaneously essential and despised, filthy and profitable. The debate often centers on their agency and identity. Were they simply victims of a system that forced them into the most degrading work, or were they shrewd entrepreneurs who carved out a lucrative niche, forming their own tight-knit communities with their own rules and codes of honor? Evidence suggests a bit of both. They were known to be fiercely independent, often working in family-based teams, then passing the trade from father to son. They had to be tough, not just to handle the work itself, but to endure the social stigma that came with it. You watch them for a while longer. The cart is nearly full. One of the men scrapes the last of the sludge from the pavement where some has spilled, shoveling it into the cart. They close up the cesspit cover, and with a quiet word to the horse, the cart begins to rumble away, leaving behind an intensified stench that will linger until morning. The night soil they've collected will be transported to depots on the edge of the city. From there, it will be loaded onto barges and shipped out to the countryside of Essex or Kent, where it will be sold as prime manure to farmers. Your food, should you ever be lucky enough to afford fresh vegetables, might well be grown in the very waste produced by the city. You crawl back to your spot on the floor. The room seems even closer and more suffocating than before. The window offers no relief, only a reminder of the raw, industrial-scale sewage being handled just below. The experience puts the privy bucket in the corner into a new perspective. It is a symptom of a much larger, systemic problem, a city generating more waste than its ancient systems could possibly handle, relying on the grim, nocturnal labor of a few shunned men to keep it from drowning in its own filth. The next day, your cousin sends you to the market with a few precious pennies to buy something for the evening meal. You emerge from the tenement's gloom and head towards one of the sprawling street markets that are the lifeblood of working-class London. This is where the city eats, and what you find is a vibrant, chaotic, and deeply suspicious world of food commerce. The market is a riot of sound and smell. Butchers in blood-stained aprons cleave carcasses with heavy choppers. Fishmongers, their voices hoarse from shouting, stand over piles of glistening, glassy-eyed fish. Women sit behind pyramids of vegetables, some looking fresh and vibrant, others looking weary and wilted. The air is thick with the competing smells of sawdust, fish guts, bruised fruit, and frying onions from a nearby pie stall. You're eager to buy bread, milk, and maybe a small piece of meat if the budget allows. You approach a baker's stall. The loaves look appealing, large and white, but your cousin had warned you. Bread, the staple food of the poor, was one of the most commonly adulterated products. To make the flour go further and to make the bread look whiter and more appealing, some unscrupulous bakers would mix in other substances. The most common adulterant was alum, a chemical which helped the bread retain water, making it heavier, and also bleached the flour. While little alum was probably harmless, larger quantities could cause serious digestive issues. More shocking, some bakers were known to mix in chalk, bone dust, or even plaster of Paris to bulk out their loaves. You eye the whitest, most perfect-looking loaf with suspicion. It seems counterintuitive, but the slightly off-white, denser-looking loaf is probably the safer, more honest choice. Next, milk. You find a milk cellar with a large metal churn, but this isn't fresh, creamy milk from a cow. This is city milk. Most of the milk sold in London's street markets came from cows kept in horrific conditions in cramped, filthy urban dairies. These animals were often sick, fed on brewery mash and other waste, and their milk was thin and bluish. To improve it, sellers would add water to increase the volume, chalk or plaster to whiten it, and sometimes even sheep's brains to simulate the creamy texture. And all this was before the inevitable contamination from dirty churns and unwashed hands. The milk was a breeding ground for bacteria, particularly tuberculosis and typhoid. This widespread food adulteration was one of the great hidden scandals of the age. It was a subject of intense investigation by reformers like the chemist Friedrich Occam, who published a famous book in 1820 called A Treatise on Adulteration as a Food and Culinary Poisons. He revealed that almost everything was being tampered with. Tea was bulked out with dried leaves from other plants, or even ironed filings to add weight. Coffee was mixed with roasted chicory, acorns, and carrots. Brightly colored sweets, so appealing to children, were often dyed with toxic chemicals like lead chromate for yellow and lead oxide for red. Even beer was not safe, with some brewers adding strychnine to mimic the bitter taste of hops. One of the strangest and most specific examples of this was the adulteration of pickled onions. To get that appealing, bright green color in pickled vegetables, vendors would sometimes boil them in brass or copper pans. This would cause the pickles to absorb copper acetate, giving them a vibrant, but highly poisonous, green hue. It's a chilling thought. The more visually appealing the food, the more likely it was to be dangerous. The central debate among historians on this topic revolves around intent versus ignorance. Were these food sellers malevolent villains, knowingly poisoning their customers for a few extra pence, or were they cogs in a larger, unregulated system, often ignorant of the true dangers of the substances they were using, and simply trying to survive in a fiercely competitive market? Some historians argue for the former, pointing to court records and undercover investigations that reveal a cynical and widespread fraud. Others take a more nuanced view, suggesting that many of these practices were long-standing traditions, and the sellers themselves didn't understand the chemistry of what they were doing. They weren't trying to poison people, they were just trying to make their product look like what customers expected it to look like. You decide to skip the milk. It's too risky. You buy the honest-looking loaf of bread and move on to the butcher's stall. Here, at least, the product is what it is: meat. But the question is, what kind of meat? And how old? Is it? You see fine cuts of beef and lamb, far beyond your price range. And then you see the cheaper trays of off-cuts, scraps, and organ meats. The smell is a little stronger here, a little gaumier. The butcher might be selling meat from diseased animals, or meat that's starting to turn, disguised with a bit of sawdust and a strategic placement of the healthier-looking pieces on top. You settle for a small, grayish-looking sausage. It's cheap, and you hope that the spices in the cooking process will kill whatever might be wrong with it. You clutch your meager purchases and head back to the tenement. You haven't just been shopping for food. You've been navigating a minefield of fraud and poison. Every meal is a gamble, a small act of faith in a system that has given you every reason to be faithless. The hunger in your stomach is matched only by the deep, unsettling feeling of suspicion about the very food you bought to satisfy it. Your cousin's husband, seeing that you're desperate for work, pulls a few strings and gets you a job alongside him, not in a massive, steam-belching factory, but in a small, back-street workshop. It's a metal finishing shop, a place that takes rough cast iron goods fire grates, boot scrapers, railings, and grinds them smooth. You are grateful for the chance to earn a wage, any wage. But as you step inside on your first day, you realize you've traded the generalized filth of the city for a concentrated, weaponized form of it. The workshop is a single, long, low, silent room. It's dark, lit only by a few grimy windows and the sparks flying from the grinding wheels. The air is so thick with metallic dust that it seems to shimmer. You can taste it instantly, a gritty, metallic bitterness that coats your mouth and throat. The noise is deafening, a constant, high-pitched scream of metal on stone that vibrates through the floor and up into your bones. Communication is impossible except by shouting directly into someone's ear. You are given a heavy, rough cast fire grate and shown to a grinding wheel. The wheel is a massive disc of stone, spun at high speed by a series of belts connected to a small, wheezing steam engine in the corner. Your job is to hold the iron grate against the spinning wheel, grinding off the rough edges and burrs until it's smooth. There is no safety guard on the wheel. There are no goggles for your eyes. There is no mask for your mouth. You press the iron to the stone, and a brilliant, terrifying shower of orange sparks flies past your face. The fine, sharp dusty mixture of iron filings and sandstone grit billows up, and you instinctively hold your breath. But it's no use. You have to breathe eventually. With every inhalation, you are drawing millions of tiny, sharp particles deep into your lungs. The man working next to you, a man who can't be more than 30 but looks 50, has a terrible, persistent cough. He has to turn away from the wheel every few minutes to spit a thick, dark phlegm onto the floor. This is grinder's rot or grinder's asthma, the common name for silicosis, a deadly lung disease caused by inhaling silica dust from the grinding stones. The life expectancy for a dry grinder like him was notoriously short, often less than 20 years from the start of his working life. Everyone in the workshop knows it, but they have no choice. This is the work that is available. The conditions in these small, unregulated workshops were often far worse than in the larger, more famous factories. The big textile mills of Manchester or the shipyards of the Clyde were massive, and while they had their own terrible dangers, they were also more visible. They were the subject of parliamentary inquiries and reform movements. But the thousands of small, hidden workshops like this one, tucked away in the back alleys of London, operated in the shadows. They were the sweatshops of the era, subject to no rules but the owner's whim. Hygiene is a non-existent concept here. There is one bucket of water in the corner for everyone to drink from, using a shared tin cup. The floor is a packed-down mixture of dirt, metal filings, and spit. There is no toilet, only the alleyway out back. Injuries are common. A slip of the hand could send a finger into the grinding wheel. A will could shatter, sending sharp fragments of stone flying like shrapnel. There is no first aid, no compensation. If you are injured, you are simply out of a job. One of the lesser known, but particularly nasty, afflictions in workshops like this was a skin condition called metal rash. The constant friction and the coating of metallic dust would cause painful, weeping sores, especially on the hands and forearms. These sores would often become infected from the general filth of the environment, leading to blood poisoning. It was another slow, painful way the job consumed a man's body. The historical debate around working conditions often gets polarized between two camps. On one side are those who, following the tradition of Marx and Engels, emphasize the relentless exploitation and dehumanization of the factory system. They paint a picture of powerless workers sacrificed at the altar of profit. On the other side, some economic historians argue that while conditions were arable by modern standards, they were often an improvement, however slight, on the grinding poverty and starvation of rural life. They argue that people flocked to these jobs because, for all their horrors, they offered a wage and a chance at survival that the countryside no longer could. The truth for you, standing in this screaming, dusty room, is that such academic distinctions are meaningless. This is simply a brutal, soul-crushing reality. At the end of the 10-hour day, you stumble out into the evening air. The familiar London smog now feels almost clean and fresh by comparison. You are coated head to toe in a fine, greasy, metallic dust. It's in your hair, in your eyebrows, under your fingernails. You can feel it in your lungs. The heavy, gritty presence. You cough, and the taste of metal fills your mouth. You've earned a few shillings. It's enough to contribute to the rent and food. But you look at your cousin's husband, at the deep lines on his face and the permanent gray pallor of his skin, and you see your own future. The city offered you a job, but the job is consuming you, particle by particle, from the inside out. The filth of London isn't just something you walk through or breathe. It's something you work in, something that is now becoming the very substance of your body. One Sunday, your only day off, your cousin's husband takes you on a long walk. He wants to show you a different London. You leave your squalid neighborhood and walk west. And with every block, the city begins to transform. The narrow, crowded streets give way to wide avenues. The grimy brick tenements are replaced by grand, white stucco terraces and spacious squares. This is the world of the rich. The air here does seem different. It's still London air, still tinged with coal smoke, but it feels thinner, less oppressive. The houses are set back from the road, protected by iron railings and small gardens. The streets are cleaner. You see municipal workers in uniform, sweeping the pavements and clearing away horsemen. The crossing sweeper boys are still here, but they are better dressed. Their service is more of a formality than a desperate necessity. You see wealthy families strolling in their Sunday best. The men are in crisp, dark suits with tall silk hats. The women wear voluminous dresses of silk and velvet, their faces shaded by elaborate bonnets. They seem to glide through the city, untouched by the grime that clings to you. They are inhabitants of a different planet, one that happens to occupy the same geographical space as yours. But their cleanliness, you begin to suspect, is something of an illusion. It's a carefully constructed bubble, maintained not so much by soap and water as by distance, servants, and scent. You observe a wealthy woman step out of her carriage. She doesn't touch the filthy street. A footman has laid down a small, portable step. Her gloved hand barely grazes the footman's arm as he assists her. Her world is one of mediated contact. She is insulated from the city's filth by layers of fabric, by servants, and by social protocol. Inside those grand houses, hygiene was a complex affair. They had access to more water than you could dream of, sometimes even a dedicated bathroom with a large, heavy bathtub. But bathing was still infrequent, perhaps once a week at most. A full bath was a major production, requiring servants to haul dozens of buckets of hot water from the basement kitchen. It was an event, not a routine. So, how did they stay fresh? The answer, in large part, was perfume. The Victorians, especially the upper classes, were masters of scent camouflage. A lady's dressing table would be covered in bottles of cologne, floral waters like rosewater or inchflower water, and potent perfumes based on musk, civet, and ambergris. These were not the light, fresh scents we think of today. They were heavy, powerful, and designed to mask, not to complement. They were an olfactory shield against the smells of the city and the smells of the unwashed body. Personal laundry was also a key factor. While a lady's silk dress might be cleaned only rarely, she wore layers of linen and cotton, undergarments, chemises, drawers, petticoats that were changed daily. These were the layers that absorbed the sweat and dirt, and they could be laundered by servants, of course much more easily than the outer garments. The appearance of cleanliness was maintained by constantly changing what was closest to the skin. One of the more peculiar obsessions of the wealthy was the fear of sewer gas. As the miasma theory took hold, the affluent became terrified that the foul-smelling air from the city as sewers could seep into their beautiful homes through the newfangled plumbing. This led to an industry of complex and often comically elaborate anti-sewer gas traps for toilets and drains. They had names like the Dikigo or the Tornado, and they were intricate feats of ceramic engineering designed to create a water barrier against the dreaded miasmas. This is a fascinating historical irony. Their fear was based on a wrong theory: sewer gas itself doesn't cause cholera. Yet it's put innovation in sanitary engineering that made plumbing safer and more effective, preventing the spread of the very waterborne diseases they misunderstood. The debate among social historians here is whether the upper-class obsession with hygiene was a genuine health concern or a form of social distinction. Was the great and washed a term of pity or of contempt? Some argue that cleanliness became a powerful moral and class signifier. To be clean was to be respectable, civilized, and morally upright. To be dirty, as the poor invariably were, was a sign of laziness, ignorance, and moral failure. This gospel of cleanliness conveniently ignored the fact that for the poor, filth was an inescapable condition of their environment and employment, not a personal choice. It allowed the rich to feel superior, to justify the vast social gulf between them and the masses, framing it not as a matter of economic inequality, but of character. You and your cousin's husband stand at the edge of a large, green park. Inside, well-dressed children roll hoops on the manicured grass, watched over by nannies in starched white uniforms. It's a peaceful, idyllic scene, but it feels entirely artificial. This isn't the real London you know. It's a carefully curated stage set, a Potemkin village of cleanliness and order. The wealth that pays for these clean streets, these grand houses, and these perfumed lives is generated by the dirty, dangerous labor of people like you, working in the screaming, dusty workshops just a mile or two away. As you turn to head back east, back to your world, you feel a strange mix of envy and resentment. The rich aren't just richer, they live in a different sensory reality. They have purchased a fragile, temporary immunity from the filth, but you know it's a fiction. The same foul river provides their water. The same sooty air fills their lungs, albeit in a diluted form. The barrier between their clean world and your dirty one is thinner than they think. One sweltering Saturday afternoon, after a grueling week in the workshop, your cousin's husband has a surprise for you. HES saved up a few pennies. We're going for a wash, he says, with a hint of excitement in his voice. HES not talking about the pathetic splash in the basin at home. HES taking you to one of the new public bath and wash houses. You walk to a neighborhood you haven't seen before, and there it is. It's a large, imposing brick building, looking more like a town hall or a library than a place to get clean. The words baths and wash houses for the laboring classes are carved in stone above the entrance. This building is a product of philanthropy and social reform, one of the first organized attempts to fight the city's grime on a mass scale. You go inside. The air is warm and steamy, filled with the unfamiliar and glorious smell of hot water and soap. The space is divided. On one side are the public laundries, where women are using large tubs with hot and cold running water and mechanical wringers. It's a vision of laundry day paradise compared to the ordeal in your cousin's room. But you are heading to the other side, the baths. You pay a penny for a second-class bath. For that price, You get a private, partitioned cubicle, a small wooden tub, and access to hot and cold water for half an hour. The attendant hands you a small, rough towel and a tiny sliver of carbolic soap. It feels like the ultimate luxury. You step into your cubicle. It's small and Spartan, but it's private. The tub is not the gleaming white porcelain of a rich man's house. It's a simple metal or wooden tub, scrubbed but stained from use. You turn the stiff iron tap, and a miracle happens. Hot water, steaming, glorious, wonderfully hot water pours into the tub. You mix in some cold until it's just right, and then, slowly, you lower yourself in. The feeling is sublime. It's a sensation you haven't felt in months, maybe years. The heat soaks into your aching muscles, loosening the knots of tension from a week of hard labor. The grime from the workshop, the layers of sweat and soot that have become a second skin, begin to dissolve. You take the carbolic soap, with its sharp, medicinal smell, and you scrub. You scrub your arms, your chest, your hair, and you watch in fascinated horror as the water around you turns a dark, soapy gray. This is the accumulated filth of London, and you are finally, truly washing it away. These public baths were a revolutionary idea. The first one was opened in Liverpool in 1842, and the movement quickly spread to London and other industrial cities, pushed forward by reformers who saw a direct link between filth and disease, and between cleanliness and morality. They believed that giving the poor a chance to be clean would not only improve their health but also their moral character. It was part of the sanitary idea, the belief that social improvement could be achieved through engineering and public works. Of course, the reality wasn't always so simple. A weird but telling detail about the early baths was the class system. You paid a penny for a second-class bath. For tuppence, you could get a first-class bath, which meant a slightly larger tub, a cleaner towel, a bigger piece of soap, and perhaps an extra 10 minutes. This stratification of cleanliness, even in a facility designed for the poor, shows just how deeply ingrained the class system was. The historical debate around these institutions is about their actual impact. Did they work? The answer is complex. On the one hand, they were incredibly popular. On the day the first London bath house opened in 1846, thousands of people queued up to use it. They provided a desperately needed service and, for a few pennies, offered a moment of dignity and physical comfort that was otherwise unattainable. For the people who used them, they were a godsend. However, some historians argue their overall public health impact was limited. A bath once a week or once a month, while good for the individual, couldn't undo the damage of living in a filthy tenement, drinking contaminated water, and working in a deadly environment. They were a treatment for the symptoms of urban squalor, not a cure for the disease itself. Critics at the time also argued that they were an expensive solution and that the money would be better spent on improving housing and sanitation at its source. But for the philanthropists who built them, the baths were a visible, tangible good, a monument to their own charity and to the Victorian belief in self-help and improvement. You let the water drain, and it leaves a thick, dark ring around the tub, a testament to the dirt you've shed. You dry yourself with a rough towel. Your skin feels strange, sensitive, alive. You put on your clothes, which now feels scratchy and dirty by comparison. You step back out onto the street. The air seems fouler, the grime on the buildings more pronounced. The experience has recalibrated your senses. For half an hour, you were in a different world, a world of warmth, privacy, and cleanliness. Now you are back, but something has shifted. That bath wasn't just about washing your body. It was a psychological release, a brief but powerful affirmation of your own humanity in a city that seemed designed to strip it away. You feel lighter, not just physically, but mentally. For the first time in a long time, you feel truly clean, and it feels like hope. You feel clean, but the feeling is fragile. Back in the tenement, the familiar smells and the clothes, Stale air quickly begins to erode the sensation. And then, a new fear starts to creep through the neighborhood. A fear whispered on the stairs and in the queue for the water pump. A few people in the next street have fallen ill. They were fine one day, and the next, they were struck down by a violent sickness of the stomach. Then some word aired within 24 hours. It's the cholera. The word hangs in the air like the smog itself. This is the great terror of the 19th century city. Not a slow, wasting disease like the grinder's rot, but a lightning-fast, terrifying killer that could wipe out whole families in a matter of days. And nobody knows where it comes from. The prevailing theory, the one all the newspapers and even most doctors subscribe to, is the miasma theory. You've lived with its logic every day. The belief is that the disease is carried in the air, in the foul stenches rising from the river, the sewers, and the accumulated filth. This cholera cloud or miasma would drift through the city, and those unfortunate enough to breathe in the poisoned air would fall sick. Living under this theory creates a unique kind of psychological terror. The enemy is invisible, airborne, and everywhere. The very air you breathe is a potential source of death. This leads to a host of desperate, and often strange, preventative measures. Your cousin stuffs rags in the cracks of the window frame, not to keep out the cold, but to keep out the bad air. People walk around holding handkerchiefs, soaked in vinegar or camphor to their noses, creating a personal bubble of safe air. Bonfires are lit in the streets, burning tar and pitch. The idea is to purify the air with smoke, to fight one strong smell with another, even stronger one. The city, already choked with coal smoke, now adds the acrid smoke of disinfectant fires to the mix. The Board of Health issues public notices, all based on the miasma theory. They recommend whitewash the walls of houses. The lime was thought to absorb miasma S. And, most urgently, the removal of all filth. Huge piles of refuse are cleared from the streets and dumped into the Thames, a move that, with tragic irony, would have only made the real source of the problem worse. One of the more peculiar and futile anti-cholera measures was the cholera belt. People, particularly from the middle and upper classes, would wear a wide belt of flannel or wool around their abdomen. The idea was that keeping the stomach warm would ward off the disease. It was a completely useless practice, but it gave people a sense of control, a feeling that they were doing something to protect themselves. You see the fear in everyone's eyes. Neighbors eye each other with suspicion. Was the family in the next room clean enough? Was the smell from their flat a danger? To yours the shared misery of poverty, which had created a kind of community, begins to fracture under the strain of this invisible threat. The historical debate here is a classic one. How does a society react to a deadly threat it doesn't understand? Historians of medicine point to the cholera epidemics as a crucial turning point. The spectacular failure of the miasma theory to explain the spread of the disease. Why did it follow the water lines? Not the wind created a crisis in the medical establishment. This crisis opened the door for a new, radical idea, the germ theory, to eventually take hold. But at this moment, on the ground, the miasma theory reigns supreme, and its dominance has real, life or death consequences. It focuses the attention of the authorities on cleaning the air, rather than cleaning the water. Your cousin's youngest child begins to look pale. She complains of a stomachache. A wave of cold dread washes over you. Is it just a common bug? Or is it the first sign of the dreaded Blue Death? So called because dehydration would turn the victim's skin a bluish-gray color. Every cough, every cry, is now heard through a filter of fear. The room, which has felt like a cramped but safe haven, now feels like a trap. The air is thick and stale, and according to the prevailing wisdom, it is poison. The water from the pump in the courtyard, which you now drink with trepidation, is a secondary concern for most. Their focus is on the invisible enemy in the atmosphere. You find yourself breathing shallowly, just as you did when you first arrived in London. But now it's not just from disgust. It's from mortal fear. The city outside is gripped by panic. Quack doctors sell useless cholera remedies on street corners. People flock to churches, praying for deliverance. The sound of the death cart, collecting bodies for quick burial in mass graves, becomes a familiar, grim sound in the night. You are living in a city under siege. But the enemy is not a foreign army. It's the city itself, its filth, its smells, its very breath. Then you are trapped right in the heart of it. The summer wears on, hot, sticky, and breathless. The cholera fear subsides in your immediate neighborhood, but the city as a whole remains on edge. And then, a new and even more democratic crisis arrives. It begins as a low-level, pervasive smell, worse than the usual, coming from the direction of the river. Within a few days, it intensifies into a stench so powerful, so profoundly offensive, that it brings the entire city to its knees. This is it. This is the summer of 1858. History will remember it as the year of the Great Stink. The cause is a perfect storm of factors. The summer is unusually hot and dry. With little rain, the level of the Thames drops, exposing the sewage-caked mudflats on its banks to the baking sun. All the raw sewage from the city's burgeoning population, flushed into the river through the newfangled toilet system, is essentially cooking in the heat. The river, which you already know is a foul soup, has become a single, gigantic, fermenting open sewer. The smell is indescribable. It's not just one bad smell, it's a complex, monstrous bouquet of every foul odor imaginable, amplified 1,000 times. Contemporary accounts described it as a combination of rotting fish, sulfur, and raw sewage, so thick you could almost taste it. It rolls off the river in visible, hazy waves. It seeps into every building, every room, from the poorest tenement to the grandest halls of power. This is what makes the Great Stink so important. Unlike cholera, which tended to hit the poor districts hardest, the stink was an equal opportunity offender. It was at its most powerful right in the heart of the city, along the Victoria Embankment, right next to the Houses of Parliament, and the politicians couldn't escape it. You hear stories, passed around with a kind of grim satisfaction in the workshop, of what's happening in Westminster. The members of Parliament, the men who run the country and the empire, are literally being driven from their chambers by the smell. They try to work, but the stench pouring in from the river windows is so nauseating that sessions have to be suspended. They try soaking the building's curtains in chloride of lime, a powerful disinfectant, to neutralize the odor. Carts are hired to dump tons of lime directly onto the Thames mudflats at low tide in a desperate attempt to quell the smell. Nothing works. The river is simply too powerful. The city's filth has come back to haunt its creators, holding the government itself hostage. A weird, little-known detail from this event is the sheer panic it caused among the miasmatists. For them, this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a potential apocalypse. If foul smells truly carried cholera and other diseases, then this unprecedented stench must be the harbinger of a plague of unimaginable proportions. The newspapers are full of doom-laden predictions. The fact that a massive cholera epidemic didn't break out during the Great Stink was one of the first major pieces of real-world evidence that undermined the miasma theory, though few recognized it at the time. The historical debate around the Great Stink isn't about what happened, but why it was such a powerful catalyst for change. For decades, reformers had been arguing for a proper sewage system. They had published reports, drawn up plans, and begged for funding, all to no avail. The project was deemed too expensive, too disruptive, so it changed. Some historians argue for a history from below perspective, suggesting that years of grassroots activism and public outcry had finally reached a tipping point. But many others argue for a more cynical history from above view. They contend that the government was finally spurred into action for one simple reason: the problem had, quite literally, arrived on their own doorstep. It's easy to ignore the plight of the poor in the East End. It's much harder to ignore a smell that makes it impossible for you to conduct the business of the empire. The Great Stink proved that you couldn't just wall off the consequences of urban squalor. The filth of the poor would, eventually, stink up the corridors of power. For you, living through it, the experience is miserable. The heat is oppressive enough on its own. The added layer of the stink makes life unbearable. You can't escape it. It's there when you wake up. It's there when you work. It's there when you try to eat your meager meal. It clings to your clothes and hair. It's a constant, nauseating reminder of the city's fundamental brokenness. But amidst the misery, there is a glimmer of change. The newspapers are full of it. The politicians are finally talking. A man named Joseph Bazaletich, a brilliant engineer with the Metropolitan Board of Works, has a plan, a bold, audacious plan for a massive new network of intercepting sewers to capture the city's waste before it reaches the river and carry it far downstream. For years, his plan was dismissed as too costly. Now, in the face of the great stink, cost is no longer the primary concern. Survival is. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, pushes a bill through Parliament in a matter of weeks, authorizing the funds for Bazaletich's scheme. It's a stunningly rapid response, driven by pure, rank necessity. As you choke on the foul air, you hear the news. They are going to fix the river. They are going to build a new sewer system. You don't know the details. You don't know how long it will take. But for the first time, it feels like the city is actually going to fight back against the filth. Not with vinegar-soaked drags and feudal bonfires, but with bricks, mortar, and engineering on an epic scale. The Great Stink was the city's lowest point, but it may also be the beginning of its salvation. The talk of new sewers is a distant promise, but the immediate fear of cholera remains very real. The epidemic of a few years prior, in 1854, has left deep scars on the city's psyche, and people still talk about it in hushed tones. And in these conversations, you begin to hear a name, spoken with a mixture of ridicule and grudging respect. Drive. John Snow. The story you piece together from workshop chatter and snippets of news is that of a doctor who had a truly radical, and too many, insane, idea. During the 1854 outbreak, which was particularly vicious in the Soho district, Snow did not believe the disease was in the air. He was a skeptic of the great miasma theory. He was an anesthetist by trade, one of the pioneers who had administered chloroform to Queen Victoria during childbirth. His work with gases made him doubt that a vapor, a miasma, could behave in the way cholera did. An airborne disease should be diffuse, spreading with the wind. Cholera was different. It was intensely local, clustering around certain streets, even certain houses, while leaving others nearby untouched. So, Snow decided to investigate, not with a microscope in a lab, but like a detective on the streets. He went into the heart of the Soho outbreak, a place others were fleeing in terror, and he started talking to people. He went door to door, asking the families of the victims a simple question: where did they get their water? He began to plot the answers on a map. Each death was a black mark on a street plan of the neighborhood. As he added more and more marks, a terrifying pattern began to emerge. The deaths were not random. They were clustered, with horrifying density, around one particular public water pump on Broad Street, now Broadwick Street. The stories you hear about his investigation are legendary. He found that workers at a nearby brewery who drank beer and used water from the brewery's own deep well were almost entirely spared. He tracked down the case of a widow who had moved away from Soho, but who had died of cholera. He discovered that she had loved the taste of the water from the Broad Street pump so much that she had a bottle of it delivered to her every day. These were the clues, the pieces of a puzzle that all pointed to one culprit: the pump. Armed with his map and his data, Snow went to the local authorities, the Board of Guardians of Street, James's Parish. He presented his evidence and argued his theory: cholera was not in the air, it was in the water. It was a waterborne disease, ingested through the mouth. The miasmatists on the board were deeply skeptical, His theory flew in the face of all established medical science. It was absurd. The historical debate here focuses on what happened next. The legend, the story often told, is that Snow, with the sheer force of his argument, convinced the board to take action, and they dramatically removed the handle from the pump, instantly ending the epidemic. It's a wonderful, heroic story of science triumphing over ignorance. The truth, as historians have uncovered, is a bit more complicated and less dramatic. The board was not fully convinced. They agreed to remove the pump handle, but more as a just-in-case measure, while they continued to believe in the miasma theory. Furthermore, by the time the handle was removed, the outbreak was already waning. People had either died or fled the area, so the pump was being used less anyway. So, did Snow's action actually stop the outbreak? Probably not directly. But that's not what makes his work so important. What he did was provide the first truly compelling, data-driven evidence for the waterborne theory of cholera. He had, through what we would now call epidemiology, identified the transmission mechanism of a major disease. A fascinating, and rather grim, little detail that came out later confirmed Snow's theory beyond all doubt. An investigation of the well beneath the Broad Street pump revealed that it was dug just a few feet away from an old, leaking cesspit. The cesspit had been collecting the waste from a house where the first cholera victim of the outbreak, a baby, had lived. The baby's dirty diapers had been emptied into the cesspit, and the contaminated liquid had seeped through the earth and into the drinking water. Snow had found the smoking gun, or rather, the leaking cesspit. Even with this evidence, Snow's theory was not immediately accepted. The medical establishment, led by powerful figures who had built their careers on the miasma theory, ridiculed him for years. It would take the work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch decades later to definitively prove the existence of germs and validate Snow's brilliant detective work. As you listen to these stories, it's like a light being switched on in a dark room. All the fear and confusion about the invisible, airborne miasma is suddenly replaced by a simple, terrifying, but understandable concept. The enemy isn't in the air you breathe, it's in the water you drink. You think of the courtyard pump, the one you use every day, standing just yards from the overflowing privy. You think of the Thames, the city's main water source and its main sewer. It all makes a horrible, perfect sense. Dr. Snow might not have been believed by the powerful, but his story, passed from person to person in the streets, plants a seed of a new kind of knowledge, a new kind of fear, one that is focused, for the first time, on the right thing. The talk of cholera, pumps, and sewers is men's talk, workshop talk. But in the tenement, among the women, another name is spoken with a different kind of reverence. Florence Nightingale. You know her as a figure from the newspapers, the lady with the lamp from the Crimean War a few years back. She's a national hero, but your cousin and her neighbors talk about her in a more practical, immediate way. They talk about her ideas on nursing, fresh air, and, above all, cleanliness. Nightingale's revolution wasn't fought on a battlefield, but in the squalid, disease-ridden military hospitals of Scutari. When she arrived there, she found that more soldiers were dying from diseases like cholera, typhus, and dysentery than from their battle wounds. The hospitals were filthy, overcrowded, and poorly ventilated. They were death traps. She didn't have the germ theory to guide her. In fact, like most of her contemporaries, she was a staunch miasmatist. She believed passionately that disease came from foul air, effluvia, generated by dirt and decay. But this is another case of a wrong theory leading to life-saving actions. Her war was a war on filth. She and her team of nurses scrubbed the hospitals from top to bottom. They cleaned the floors, the walls, the bedding. They opened windows to let in fresh air and sunlight. They made sure the soldiers were given clean clothes and decent food. The results were dramatic. The mortality rate in the hospitals plummeted. She had proven, on a mass scale, that basic hygiene saved lives. But Nightingale was more than just a compassionate nurse. She was a brilliant statistician. She knew that stories about the lady with the lamp were powerful, that data was more powerful. She gathered meticulous records of mortality rates before and after her sanitary reforms. And then she did something truly revolutionary. She visualized the data. One of her most famous inventions, a lesser known but incredibly influential one, was the polar area diagram, a kind of pie chart. She used these colorful diagrams to show, with irrefutable visual clarity, that the vast majority of army deaths, the blue wedges in her chart, were from preventable diseases, while deaths from wounds, the red wedges, were a much smaller fraction. It was a masterpiece of data visualization, designed to be easily understood by politicians and bureaucrats who wouldn't have the patience to read a dense statistical report. She was, in essence, the inventor of the modern infographic, using it as a weapon in her fight for reform. The historical debate surrounding Nightingale is a complex one. For a long time, she was portrayed as a gentle, saintly figure, the embodiment of feminine compassion. More recent historians have challenged this, revealing a tougher, more complex character. She was a relentless, often ruthless, political operator who used her fame and her data to bully politicians and shame the army into reform. The debate now is not about her goodness, but about the nature of her genius. Was she primarily a great nurse, a great administrator, or a great statistician? The answer is that she was all three, and it was this unique combination of skills that made her so effective. Her influence trickled down from the grand stage of military reform into the domestic sphere. Her book, Notes on Nursing: What It Is and What It Is Not, became a bestseller. It wasn't just for professional nurses, it was aimed at ordinary women, at every woman who had to care for a sick family member, and its central message was simple: cleanliness is the cornerstone of health. Your cousin has heard of the book, even if she can read it. Its ideas spread like gospel through word of mouth, magazine articles, and advice from local clergy or doctors. The core tenets were simple and practical. Wash your hands frequently, change bedding and clothes regularly, keep the patient's room clean, and, above all, well ventilated. Open the window, even in the cold of winter. Open the window for a little while each day to let the bad air out and the good air in. You see this in practice when your cousin's child is ill with a fever. She insists on propping open a single window for a few minutes each morning and evening. Despite the cold, she is meticulous about washing the child's face and hands with her meager supply of water. She changes the child's small shirt every day, even though it adds to the never-ending pile of laundry. She is, in her own small way, practicing the Nightingale method. She is fighting the disease not with medicine, which she can't afford, but with hygiene, which she can control. Nightingale's work, combined with the growing public awareness from people like Dwight Snow, helped to create a profound cultural shift. Cleanliness was being reframed. It was no longer just about appearance or getting rid of bad smells. It was becoming a matter of life and death, a moral duty, a form of preventative medicine. The fight against filth was no longer just the domain of a few radical reformers. It was becoming a domestic crusade, waged by ordinary women in their own homes, armed with a scrubbing brush, a bar of soap, and a new, powerful idea. The grand pronouncements of men in Parliament were one thing, but this quiet, determined revolution, taking place in millions of rooms like yours, was just as important in changing the face and the smell of the nation. The great stink of 1858 may have faded from memory, but it left behind a mandate of iron and brick. The talk of fixing the sewers has become a reality all across London. A project of almost unimaginable scale is beginning. You see the signs of it everywhere. Streets are being torn up. Huge trenches, like man-made canyons, are being cut through the city. Armies of workers, the navvies, are descending into the earth. The age of Joseph Bazalettage's Great London sewerage system has begun. You and your cousin's husband sometimes walk to the construction sites on a Sunday, marveling at the sheer ambition of it all. This isn't just a repair job, it's a complete reimagining of the city's innards. Basiletich's plan is ingenious. Instead of trying to replace the thousands of old, local sewers, he decided to build a new, parallel system of interceptor sewers. These massive, arterial tunnels would run from west to east, following the gentle downward slope of the Thames Valley. They were designed to intercept the flow from the old sewers before it could reach the river, capturing the waste and channeling it far eastward, beyond the main metropolitan area. The scale of the engineering is breathtaking. You see gangs of navvies digging by hand, their shovels and pickaxes ringing in the air. You see steam-powered cranes lifting tons of earth and lowering perfectly curved sections of brickwork into the trenches. The sewers themselves are beautiful, in a strange, industrial way. They are vast, circular, or egg-shaped tunnels, built to last. Basilitich famously insisted on using the highest quality Portland cement, a material far stronger than what was required. He would test batches of it himself, and if it wasn't up to his standards, he'd reject the entire lot. He was building for a future he couldn't see, calculating population growth and rainfall patterns to ensure his system wouldn't be overwhelmed for at least a century. A little-known but brilliant feature of his design was the shape of the tunnels. Most of them were egg-shaped, with the narrower part at the bottom. This was a clever piece of hydraulic engineering. When the flow of sewage was low, it would be concentrated in the narrow bottom channel, making it move faster and preventing solids from settling and creating blockages. During heavy rain, the wider upper part of the tunnel could accommodate the increased volume. It was a self-cleaning design. The men who built this system, the navvies, were a tribe unto themselves. They were legendary for their physical strength, their prodigious appetites for food and beer, and their nomadic lifestyle. Moving from one great public works project to the next, it was incredibly dangerous work. Tunnel collapses, underground floods, and explosions from pockets of methane gas were constant threats. Hundreds of men died during the construction. They were the unsung, anonymous heroes of this sanitary revolution, their bodies buried in the foundations of the clean city they were helping to create. The academic debate around this massive project is less about its effectiveness. It was an unqualified success and more about its unintended consequences. Some urban historians argue that the construction of the sewers and the new embankments that housed them, like the Victoria Embankment, radically reshaped London in ways that had profound social impacts. The project involved a huge amount of slum clearance. Old, waterfront communities that had existed for centuries were bulldozed to make way for the new infrastructure. While this was often framed as a necessary part of sanitary improvement, it also displaced thousands of poor families, pushing them further east and creating the concentrated, impoverished East End that would become notorious in the later Victorian period. It was a project that cleaned the city, but also hardened its lines of social and geographical segregation. For you, the construction is a source of both hope and disruption. Your daily walk to the workshop is now a detour around a massive trench. The air is filled with brick dust instead of just soot, but it's a productive dust. It's the dust of progress. You watch the navvies, lean and hard as the iron they work with, and you feel a sense of awe. They are not just digging a ditch, they are building a subterranean river, a brick-lined dragon that will swallow the city's filth and carry it away. Years will pass before the system is fully operational, but the very act of its construction changes the psychology of the city. It's a visible, tangible sign that the chaos can be tamed, that the filth can be conquered. It's an act of immense civic confidence, a declaration that London is not going to be defined by its own waste. You can't see the end result yet, but you can see the beginning. And the beginning looks like an army of men with shovels, digging a better future for the city, one bucket of earth at a time. The underground dragon is taking shape, and with it, the promise of a cleaner, healthier world above. As the great sewers are being built beneath the ground, A quieter but equally profound revolution is happening on the surface, in shop windows and on posters pasted to brick walls. It's the rise of soap. Soap has been around for centuries, of course, but it was often a harsh, smelly, brownish substance made from animal fats and lye, used for scrubbing laundry, not for personal hygiene. Now, something is changing. You start to see advertisements, not just small notices, but large, eye-catching posters. They are for new brands of soap pears, levers, Life's and these advertisements are not just selling a product, they are selling an idea. They are selling cleanliness itself. The posters are aspirational. They don't show the grimy reality of your life. They show beautiful, rosy-cheeked children with cherubic smiles, being bathed by serene, loving mothers in bright, clean rooms. The famous Bears soap ad, featuring a curly-haired child reaching for a bar of soap, has the tagline, "He won't be happy till he gets it." It's a message that links soap not just with cleanliness, but with happiness, childhood innocence, and maternal love. Another famous series of ads from Lever Brothers for their Sunlight soap shows tired, weary women transformed by the miracle of this new product, which makes the grueling wash day suddenly easy and manageable. The message is clear: this soap will not just clean your clothes, it will liberate you. This is the birth of modern advertising, and its first great subject is hygiene. The soap manufacturers were pioneers of branding. They created distinctive packaging, memorable slogans, and powerful imagery to build customer loyalty. They understood that they weren't just selling saponi feed fat, they were selling social status, health, and even moral virtue. A fascinating and slightly bizarre example of this was the marketing for Life's soap. It was one of the first carbolic soaps, containing carbolic acid phenol as a disinfectant. It had a strong, medicinal smell that its marketers brilliantly turned into a selling point. They advertised it as the health soap, the soap that killed germs, a concept that was just beginning to enter public consciousness thanks to the work of Pasteur and Lister. The smell, they implied, was the smell of safety. Buying Life's was like buying a little piece of health insurance for your family. It was a clever way to turn a potentially unpleasant feature into a sign of efficacy. The historical debate here centers on the relationship between commerce and culture. Did the soap companies simply respond to a pre-existing, growing public demand for cleanliness, or did they, through their powerful and persuasive advertising, actually create the demand? Most social historians argue it was a feedback loop. The sanitary reforms, the fear of disease, and the work of people like Nightingale created an environment where people were or receptive to the message of cleanliness. The soap companies then amplified and commercialized that message, turning a vague public health concern into a specific consumer desire. They didn't invent the gospel of cleanliness, but they became its most effective preachers. They made hygiene something you could buy in a pretty wrapper for a few pennies. This new, affordable, mass-produced soap starts to appear in your life. A small shop near the tenement begins to stock it. Your cousin, after seeing the posters and hearing the buzz, decides to spend a precious penny on a bar of Sunlight soap for the next wash day. The difference is noticeable. It lathers better than the harsh lye soap. It's gentler on her hands, and the clothes come out smelling, if not looking, a little fresher. You even buy a small bar of carbolic soap for yourself. The sharp, clean smell feels like a shield against the grime of the workshop and the germs you now know are everywhere. The daily wash of your hands and face with this new soap feels more meaningful, more effective than the old ritual with plain water. This small, everyday act is part of a massive shift. Cleanliness is being democratized. It's no longer a luxury for the rich, attainable only with the help of servants and expensive perfumes. It's becoming an accessible, expected standard for everyone. The bar of soap in your hand is a symbol of this change. It represents the intersection of industrial chemistry, mass marketing, and public health. It's a small, solid piece of progress. Of course, it doesn't solve the bigger problems. The tenement is still damp, the air is still sooty, and the work is still dangerous. But the victory of soap represents a change in mindset. The idea that you can, and should, fight back against the filth on a personal, daily basis is taking root. The war on dirt is being fought on to fronts with the massive, subterranean cannons of Basiletige's sewers, and with the small, but ubiquitous infantry of the soap bar. You have new weapons in your war against filth. A bar of carbol dicks open the knowledge that cleanliness matters, that you are not fighting this war alone. You have roommates, and they are not the humankind. You are living in a world teeming with tiny, persistent, and unwelcome cohabitants: fleas, lice, and the dreaded bed bug. You've become accustomed to the itching. It's a low-level, chronic annoyance, a part of the sensory background of your life, like the distant factory hammer or the smell of coal smoke. At night, lying on your straw mattress on the floor, the itching often gets worse. You scratch in your sleep, and you wake up with small red welts on your skin. These are the nightly signatures of the flea. Fleas are everywhere. The straw in your mattress is a perfect breeding ground for them. The floorboards, with their dusty, door cracks, are flea nurseries. The lack of regular, deep cleaning and the presence of so many warm bodies in one room create a paradise for these tiny bloodsuckers. People try to fight back. Your cousin sometimes scatters strong-smelling herbs like mint or penurial on the floor, a folk remedy believed to repel fleas. It doesn't really work. Then there are the lice. Head lice are a constant problem, especially for the children who play in close quarters with others. Your cousin spends hours every week painstakingly combing her children's hair with a fine-toothed knit comb, trying to remove the tiny white eggs. Body lice are even worse. They live in the seams of clothing, coming out to feed on the body at night. In an era when clothes were worn for days on end and laundry was a monumental task, getting rid of them was nearly impossible. They were not just an itchy nuisance, they were also vectors for a much more serious disease: typhus, or jail fever. But the most reviled of all these tiny tenants is the bed bug. Mimics like Eulerias. They are masters of stealth, flat-bodied creatures that hide in the cracks of the wooden bed frames, in the walls, and under loose wallpaper during the day. At night, drawn by the warmth and carbon dioxide of sleeping humans, they emerge to feed. Their bites are maddeningly itchy, and a serious infestation can lead to sleepless nights and chronic anxiety. You hear stories of people trying to eradicate them. They pour boiling water into the joints of their bed frames. They use bellows to puff sulfurous smoke into the cracks. Some even resort to coating the legs of their beds with a sticky substance to trap the bugs as they try to climb up. One particularly strange and desperate measure was to use a solution of mercury chloride, a highly toxic poison, to paint the bed frame and walls. It was probably more dangerous to the humans sleeping in the bed than to the bugs themselves. The historical debate around this topic is an interesting one. It's not about whether these pests existed, they were a documented misery for centuries. The debate is about when and why they began to decline. Some historians credit the rise of the iron bedstead. In the mid-19th century, iron bedstead began to replace wooden ones, especially in institutions like hospitals, workhouses, and barracks. They were cheaper, more durable, and, crucially, had far fewer cracks and crevices for bed bugs to hide in. This simple change in furniture design may have done more to combat bed bugs than any chemical. Other historians argue that the general improvement in domestic hygiene was the key factor. The increasing use of soap, more frequent washing of bedding, the replacement of straw mattresses with cotton or flock ones, and the move towards less cluttered, more easily cleaned rooms all contributed to making homes less hospitable for pests. The war against bed bugs wasn't won in a single, decisive battle. It was a slow war of attrition, won by changing the very environment they thrived in. For now, however, You are living in the thick of the battle. One night, you are woken by a shout from your cousin. She has lit a candle and is staring at the wall by the mattresses. In the flickering light, you see them, a small army of reddish-brown bed bugs, frozen in their nightly march. The sight is deeply unsettling. It's a violation, a reminder that your small, crowded home is not truly your own. It is shared territory. The next day is spent in a furious, but likely futile, counterattack. The mattresses are dragged outside into the courtyard to be beaten, a process that probably just dislodges the bugs temporarily. Your cousin scrubs the floorboards around the sleeping area with precious hot water and lye. It's a day of exhausting, frustrating work, born of disgust and desperation. That night, as you lie down to sleep, you can't relax. Every tickle, every itch, every rustle in the dark makes you imagine them, crawling out of the walls. You are fighting a war against the microscopic, the microscopic, and the microscopic that hides. The filth of London isn't just the visible grime and the invisible germs, it's also this creeping, crawling, biting infestation. It's another layer of misery, another tax on the spirit in a city that demands so much and gives so little. You walk past a local parish church. It's a small, ancient building, hemmed in on all sides by the newer, taller tenements. What strikes you is not the church itself, but the churchyard. It's a tiny patch of green, or what used to be green. Nil. It's a chaotic jumble of leaning, weathered headstones. But that's not the problem. The problem is the ground itself. It seems to be raised. The entire churchyard is a mound, several feet higher than the surrounding streets, held back by a bulging brick wall. Your cousin's husband explains why. This small plot of land has been the burial ground for this parish for centuries. It is full, utterly, completely, horrifically full, but people keep dying, and they need to be buried. So, the graviturgs don't dig down. They dig into the existing mass of human remains, break up old coffins, and cram new bodies into the spaces they create. The ground level has been rising for decades. The slow, grim geological process fueled by death. The smell on a warm day is sickeningly sweet and earthy. It's the smell of decay seeping through the soil, but the smell is the least of the problems. The real horror is what this overcrowding does to the environment. The churchyard is a concentrated repository of decomposing organic matter. As it rains, a vile, black liquid, a kind of corpse liquor, leaches out from the soil, contaminating the ground all around it. It runs into the cellars of the neighboring houses and, most terrifyingly, into the wells and water pumps that people rely on for drinking water. The dead are literally poisoning the living. You hear stories of grim and macabre incidents. A new grave being dug might collapse into an older one below, revealing a tangled mass of bones and decaying wood. Sometimes, the pressure from the saturated ground becomes so great that the retaining walls of the churchyards burst, spilling their gruesome contents into the streets or basements. This was a major public health crisis, a direct consequence of the city's explosive population growth colliding with its ancient, parish-based system of burial. A prominent public health reformer and journalist named George Alfred Walker campaigned tirelessly against this practice, which he called intramural burial within the city walls. He published horrifying accounts and graphic illustrations of the conditions in London's graveyards, trying to shock the public and the government into action. He described graviturgs who were constantly drunk to cope with the horror of their work, and who suffered from strange illnesses after being exposed to the miasmas from the graves. A particularly bizarre and little-known aspect of this crisis was the bone house. Because the graveyards were so full, old bones that were dug up to make way for new burials had to be stored somewhere. Many churches had a crypt or a small outbuilding, a charnel house, where these skeletal remains were piled up, often in chaotic, dusty heaps. It was a stark, physical manifestation of the city's inability to cope with the sheer volume of its own dead. The historical debate here revolves around the shift from churchyard burial to the new, large, suburban cemeteries. Was this shift driven primarily by the sanitary concerns pushed by reformers like Walker, or was it also driven by new Victorian ideas about death and remembrance? The traditional view emphasizes the public health argument. The urban graveyards were a clear and present danger, and the move to cemeteries was a logical, necessary step in the sanitary revolution. However, more recent cultural historians argue that this is only part of the story. They point to the rise of a new culture of death in the Victorian era. The old, crowded, anonymous churchyard no longer fit with the new emphasis on the individual, the family, and perpetual remembrance. The new garden cemeteries like Highgate or Kensal Green offered a romantic, picturesque, and sanitary alternative. They were beautifully landscaped parks on the outskirts of the city, where a family could buy a private plot, erect a grand monument, and visit the grave of their loved one in a peaceful, reflective setting. These cemeteries weren't just a practical solution to a sanitary problem, they were a commercial enterprise that catered to the emotional and social needs of the rising middle class. The move was as much about sentiment as it was about sanitation. Standing in front of this bulging, morbidly fertile plot of land, you feel another layer of the city's dysfunction pressing in on you. The city can't even offer a clean, dignified place for its dead, let alone its living. The very ground is saturated with death, a constant, festering reminder of the generations who have lived and died in these same streets, their final resting places becoming just another source of poison for those who follow. The distant promise of the new sewers seems like a grand solution for the living. But what about the dead? The sight of this overflowing churchyard makes you realize that the filth of London isn't just a problem of the present. It's a problem that reaches down into the very soil, a legacy of centuries of life and death crammed into too small a space. It's a problem that will require more than just new pipes. It will require a whole new way of thinking about the city's relationship with life, and with death itself. The tide, it seems, is slowly turning. It's not a sudden flood of change, but a slow, grinding advance, noticeable in small ways. You see more uniformed street sweepers. The talk of the new sewers is constant, and you start to hear people discussing something new: the law. Not the laws against theft or violence, but a new kind of law, one that reaches into the tenements, the workshops, and the very streets themselves. This is the era of the Great Public Health Acts. The first one, passed back in 1848 in the shadow of a cholera epidemic, had been a weakened, largely optional piece of legislation. It suggested the creation of local boards of health but gave them few real powers. But as the century wears on, and as the evidence from men like Snow, the activism of women like Nightingale, and the sheer horror of events like the Great Stink accumulate, the government is forced to act more decisively. New laws are passed with more teeth. The Sanitary Act of 1866, for instance, for the first time made it the responsibility of the local authorities to inspect their districts and to deal with nuisances, a wonderfully Victorian catch-all term that could mean anything from an overflowing cesspit to a dangerously smoky chimney or a house unfit for human habitation. Landlords could now, in theory, be compelled to connect their properties to the new sewers, to clean up their filthy courtyards, or to repair their dilapidated buildings. You see the first, tentative signs of this in your own neighborhood. Eamon in a bowler hat and a dark suit, carrying a clipboard, appears in your courtyard. He is a sanitary inspector, one of a new breed of public officials. He walks around, making notes, his nose wrinkled in disgust. He peers into the communal privy. He examines the overflowing rubbish heap in the corner, and he glares at the green slime coating the walls near the water pump. He is not a welcome figure. The landlord sees him as a threat to his profits. The tenants, including your cousin, see him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Will he actually force the landlord to fix things, or will he just cause trouble, leading to evictions or higher rents for many? The squalor they live in is at least a known quantity. The intervention of the state is an unknown, and potentially dangerous. Variable. One of the strange, unintended consequences of these early public health laws was the rise of the slum landlord as a defined, villainous figure in the public imagination. The new laws, by placing responsibility on property owners, created a clear antagonist in the story of urban filth. This was useful for reformers, as it gave them a target. However, it also sometimes oversimplified the problem. Many of the owners of these terrible tenements were not wealthy, mustache-twirling villains, but small-time investors, themselves only a few steps up the economic ladder, who had sunk their life savings into a property and had no capital for major improvements. The historical debate here is a classic one. Does change come from the top down or the bottom up? The top down historians emphasize the crucial role of these parliamentary acts and the dedicated civil servants, like the engineer Joseph Bazeletich or the lawyer and reformer Edwin Chadwick, who drove them. They argue that without the power of the state to compel change, all the local activism and personal cleanliness in the world would have been futile. The scale of the problem was simply too large for individual action. The bottom-up historians argue the opposite. They contend that the laws were only passed because of decades of pressure from below from journalists, doctors, clergymen, and ordinary people who agitated for reform. They argue that the laws themselves were often ineffective, unless they were enforced by vigilant local communities and inspectors. The law on the books was one thing, the law in the filthy courtyard was another. True change, they say, happened when the residents of a place like your tenement began to demand better, to understand their rights, and to use the new laws as a tool. You see a small victory of this new legal power a few weeks after the inspector's visit. A team of workmen arrives, employed by the parish. They don't fix the leaky roof or the jammed windows, but they do something significant. They spend a day cleaning out the communal privy and dusting the walls with chloride of lime. They also erect a small brick wall around the rubbish heap, containing it slightly. And, most importantly, they post a notice, signed by the medical officer of health, warning that fines will be levied for dumping refuse improperly. It's a small change. The building is still a miserable place to live, but it's something. It's the first time you have ever seen an authority take direct action to clean your immediate environment. The law, which has always felt like a distant, abstract thing concerned with the affairs of the rich, has made a brief, tangible appearance in your life. It smells, for the moment, faintly of lime disinfectant, and that, you realize, is the smell of a slow, bureaucratic, but undeniable form of progress. The state is finally, reluctantly, beginning to accept that the health of its poorest citizens is its own responsibility. Years are passing. You are no longer the fresh-faced newcomer, shocked by the city's filth. You are a Londoner, hardened and accustomed to its ways. The work in the grinding shop has etched lines on your face and a permanent intraddle in your chest. But as you look around, you notice that the city itself is changing. And more importantly, the people are changing with it. The war on dirt is moving from an external battle fought with laws and sewers to an internal one, fought in the minds and habits of ordinary people. You see it in the small things. Your cousin no longer needs to be convinced to buy soap. It's a standard part of her meager weekly budget. Her children are chided for not washing their hands before eating, a concept that would have seemed bizarre and fussy a decade ago. The idea that dirt is not just unpleasant, but dangerous, has taken root. The miasma theory, with its vague fear of bad smells, is slowly being replaced by a more specific, though not yet fully understood, fear of germs. This shift in consciousness is being driven by a powerful new alliance religion, morality, and science. You hear it in the sermons of the local vicar, who now preaches that cleanliness is next to guidelines. He links physical purity with spiritual purity. A clean home and a clean body are presented as outward signs of an ordered, moral, Christian life. Dirt, in this new moral landscape, is not just a sign of poverty, it's a sign of sin, of idleness and moral decay. This gospel of cleanliness is incredibly powerful because it works on multiple levels. For the middle class reformers promoting it, it's a way to civilize the masses, to impose their own values of order, discipline, and respectability on the chaotic working class. For the people on the receiving end, like your family, it offers a tangible way to improve their lives and to feel a sense of control and self-respect in a world that offers very little of either. Keeping your small room clean, against all odds, becomes an act of defiance, a statement of your own worth. One of the strangest manifestations of this new mindset is the sanitary, aesthetic movement. People start to believe that things that look clean are inherently more beautiful and more moral. This has a profound effect on interior design. The dark, heavy, dust-collecting clutter of the early Victorian home, the heavy drapes, the thick carpets, the fussy furniture starts to go out of style. It's replaced by a fashion for lighter woods, simpler forms, and, most importantly, washable surfaces, linoleum floors, tiled walls in kitchens and bathrooms, and easily wiped-down wallpapers become popular. These aren't just stylistic choices, they are hygiene choices. The home is being redesigned as a machine for health. The historical debate here is a fascinating one, touching on social control and personal agency. Did this gospel of cleanliness empower the working class by giving them new tools and knowledge to improve their health, or did it function as a subtle form of social control, a way for the middle class to impose its values and surveil the lives of the poor? The sanitary inspector, with his clipboard, can be seen as either a benevolent agent of public health or a judgmental intruder enforcing middle-class norms. Historians like Michel Foucault have argued that these kinds of public health movements were part of a broader shift in how power operates in modern societies, moving from overt force to a more subtle biopore that seeks to manage and regulate the lives and bodies of the population. You see both sides of this coin. On the one hand, the new emphasis on hygiene is clearly making life better. The air in the tenement room is fresher since your cousin became a devotee of the daily window opening ritual. The children seem to suffer from fewer stomach bugs. On the other hand, you also feel the pressure of this new morality. When a neighbor's flat is particularly dirty, you hear others whispering about them, judging them not for being poor, but for being unrespectable. The new social hierarchy is being created, one based not just on wealth, but on perceived cleanliness. You are living through the birth of the modern obsession with hygiene, the fundamental idea that the home should be a sealed-off, private sanctuary, protected from the dirt and germs of the outside world, is being born in these very streets. Before, the filth was an accepted, shared reality. No, it's a private shame to be fought and conquered within the four walls of your own home. The city is still dirty, but the relationship with that dirt has fundamentally changed. It is no longer an act of God or an inescapable fate. It is an enemy that can be seen, understood, and fought. The fight is now personal. It's a daily struggle for health, for respectability, and for a small patch of order in the urban chaos. The revolution isn't just in the sewers beneath your feet. It's in the way you see the world, and the way you wash your hands. The years have spun by. It's the turn of the century. You are an old man now, your hair gray, your hands gnarled. You stand on the Victoria Embankment, a grand, granite-walled promenade that didn't exist when you first arrived. It was built atop Joseph Bazalettage's massive interceptor sewer. You look out over the Thames. It's still a muddy, busy river, but it's not the monstrous open sewer you remember. The Great Stink is now just a story you tell to wide-eyed youngsters, a legend from a forgotten, foul-smelling age. The city around you is transformed. The air, while still smoky from countless coal fires, feels breathable. The ever-present, overpowering smell of horse manure is fading as the first noisy, horseless carriages begin to appear on the streets. The streets themselves are cleaner, paved with smooth asphalt in many places. and regularly washed down by municipal water carts. The cacophony of iron-shod wheels on cobblestones is softening to the hiss of rubber tires. You walk back towards your neighborhood. The tenement is still there, a monument to a grimmer time, but even it has changed. It now has a piped water supply. A single cold water tap has been installed on each landing, a luxury that would have seemed like a king's ransom in your youth. The back-breaking, multi-trip journeys to the courtyard pump are a thing of the past. The communal privy in the yard has been replaced by a row of flush toilets, one shared between several families. They are still grim and often unclean, but they are a world away from the cesspit and the privy bucket. The changes are not just physical, they are embedded in the very fabric of life. In the market, you now see food inspectors checking the quality of meat and milk. Food adulteration, while not eliminated, has been driven underground by new laws and regulations. You see posters not just for soap, but for disinfectants, for tooth powders guaranteed to be free of acid, and for scientific cleaning products. Hygiene has become an industry, a science, and a core domestic value. A particularly telling, small detail of this new world is the public drinking fountain. You see them on street corners, ornate iron nor stone structures, often inscribed with the name of a philanthropic donor. They offer free, clean water to the public, a direct response to the horrors of the contaminated pumps like the one on Broad Street. They are a symbol of the new civic understanding that access to clean water is a basic human right, not a commodity to be bought and sold by private companies. Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint a single moment when everything changed. There was no single law, no single invention, no single person who cleaned up London. The historical debate over how this transformation occurred is still active. Was it the engineers like Boswell who built the infrastructure, the scientists like Snow, who identified the enemy, the politicians who passed the laws, the reformers like Nightingale, who changed the culture, the capitalists who sold the soap, or was it the millions of ordinary people like your cousin, who waged a daily war against filth in their own homes? The consensus among most historians today is that it was all of them. A slow, complex, and often contradictory process. It was a convergence of top-down state intervention and bottom-up cultural change. The sewers would not have been built without the political will created by public outcry. The new habits of cleanliness would not have taken hold without the new availability of cheap soap and clean water. It was a messy, chaotic, and deeply human process of a city slowly, painfully, learning how to live with itself. You reach your building and climb the stairs. A slow and wheezing journey now. You enter your small room. It's still cramped, still poor, but it's clean. The window is open a crack, letting in the cool evening air. A bar of soap sits in a dish by the basin. It strikes you that the story of your life has been the story of the city's battle with its own dirt. You survived the grinder's rot. The color is scarce, the great stink. You lived through the age of filth and have emerged, blinking, into an age of relative cleanliness. You look out the window at the sprawling, gaslit city. The London of your youth was a place that felt actively hostile to human life, a city that was trying to poison you with its air, its water, and its food. The London of your old age is still a hard place, still a city of vast inequalities, but it is no longer trying to kill you with its own filth. The air seems a little clearer now. Not just of soot, but of fear, and as you stand there, you take a deep, slow breath. It's not perfect, but it's better. It's a start. The city outside begins to quiet down. The last of the carriages have rattled home, and the distant hum of the great metropolis softens to a low, steady murmur, like a sleeping giant's breath. The moonlight, no longer fighting through a thick, yellow shroud, casts long, soft shadows down the street below. You can almost imagine the stars, hiding just behind the gentle glow of the gas lights. The room is still and quiet now, save for the gentle ticking of a clock on the mantelpiece. Each tick a soft footstep walking you further away from the noisy, grimy day. The air you breathe is calm and cool, carrying none of the old terrors, none of the sulfurous bite of industry or the ghosts of disease. It is just air, simple and still. You feel the weight of the day, the weight of all the years, gently lifting from your shoulders. The world of grinding wheels and overflowing rivers and shouting crowds dissolves, its sharp edges blurring on, softening into the stuff of memory. It's a story that has been told, a journey that is now complete. And as you settle deeper into the quiet, a gentle drowsiness begins to enfold you, like the softest, cleanest blanket. The thoughts of the day begin to drift, untethering from their anchors, floating away into a peaceful, hazy sea. There is nothing left to do now, nothing left to fight. The struggle is over. There is only the quiet of the room, the softness of your pillow, and the slow, easy rhythm of your own breathing, leading you gently down into the deep, restorative quiet of a peaceful sleep. Let the current carry you now. Drift and rest.